The Dark Side of Donald Trump by Anthony Scaramucci and Maggie Haberman. Open book. The story begins not in a boardroom or on a political stage, but in the quiet stillness of a late evening. A single light glowed inside a newsroom office, where Maggie Haberman sat at her desk, surrounded by piles of notes, interviews, and fragments of memory she had collected over years. Her pen scratched slowly across a yellow legal pad as she tried to make sense of it all, not just the man named Donald Trump, but the shadow he cast over a nation. The silence of the room carried a heaviness, as though the air itself was weighed down by the contradictions of the story she had spent her career uncovering. At the same time, miles away, Anthony Scaramucci was in his home, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. Once a loyal defender of Trump, once even part of his administration, he knew the gravity of what had happened when he aligned himself with the former president. He had seen the blinding light of power, but he had also felt the piercing darkness that came when loyalty demanded the sacrifice of integrity. That night, as the lights of the city twinkled beyond the glass, Scaramucci couldn't escape the feeling that he had been both a witness and a participant in something that would leave deep scars on the soul of America. The story of Donald Trump, as both Maggie and Anthony had come to understand, was never simple. On one side was the showman, the man who had built an empire out of his name, who sold dreams of success and power to anyone willing to believe. He could walk into a room and command attention, shape narratives, and bend people to his will with sheer force of personality. To some, he was an icon of strength and defiance. But beneath that polished exterior was another reality, a dark side that consumed those closest to him and, eventually, threatened to consume the very fabric of democracy. For Maggie, this wasn't just an abstract concept. She had interviewed countless people who had worked alongside Trump, people who described the magnetic pull of his charisma but also the ruthless way he turned on anyone who no longer served his interests. They spoke of loyalty tests, of sudden excommunications, of fear that clung to staffers like a shadow. She saw patterns emerge in every story: ambition turned to bitterness, trust turned to betrayal, hope turned to disillusionment. Anthony had lived it. He remembered his own brief time as Trump's communications director, how he walked into the White House believing he could bring order to chaos, only to find himself swept into a storm. Within days, he was discarded, another casualty of the endless churn that defined Trump's orbit. The sting of betrayal was sharp, but even sharper was the realization that he had ignored warning signs, silenced his own doubts, and convinced himself that being close to power was worth the cost. It wasn't. As the story unfolded, both Maggie and Anthony began to connect th.